Hi, my name is Alyssa Clements, and I did my presentation on housing the homeless. Next slide, please. California's homeless population is at an all-time high, specifically in the city of Los Angeles. There is an area infamously known as Skid Row, which holds one of the largest populations of homeless people in the United States. The big debate is whether or not the government should provide housing for their homeless. Some argue that soup kitchens and shelters are enough, while others advocate for the need for social services, treatments, and housing to be provided. The different sides of the debates are the homeless and homeless advocates, which are obviously for housing the homeless, whereas the government is divided on whether housing should be their responsibility or not. And many people living in the communities where the homeless would be housed are very against it. Many believe that providing housing for the homeless will help reduce homeless rates in the long term, whereas others believe that housing them will only enable them to not have to work as hard as others. Next slide, please. Throughout this presentation, I will talk about the terms used such as HUD-VASH, the historical context of how the homeless population rose so drastically so fast, and I will be covering both sides of the argument for housing and to not house the homeless along with supporting evidence. Lastly, I will talk about my critiques of the programs provided for the homeless and my commentary on why the homeless deserve to be treated better. My main definition is HUD-VASH, which is Housing and Urban Development Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing. They provide permanent housing for veterans while also providing case managers and social services. Next slide, please. As for historical context, a rise in homelessness came after World War II when the housing developments couldn't keep up with the population growth. The homeless population is also directly linked to the housing crisis. There is a severe lack of affordable housing and very limited housing assistance programs. Many of these programs have really long waiting lists. They can take up to years before you can even actually be provided housing. There have been treatment programs that do not provide housing, and there have been housing programs that are implemented without an abstinence contingency from substance abuse. This just means that these programs provide housing first, but they don't require the participant to remain sober in the program. These programs tend to be less effective in reducing homeless rates. Their motive is that in providing housing, they can help the homeless sustain a more stable lifestyle. Next slide, please. For argumentation, the homeless should be provided with housing because a stable environment allows for them to focus on assimilating into society. Not having to worry about shelter allows for them to prioritize receiving healthcare and social services. Shelters oftentimes are overcrowded and are only able to provide for a fraction of the homeless population. Not to mention, a lot of homeless people report that they don't even find shelters safe and very constricting on what they're even allowed to do. So many homeless people won't even try to go there. As for the homeless shouldn't be provided with housing, some areas do not have the available space to house the homeless. For example, Los Angeles City is known for its overcrowding. When you drive around LA, you never see just plots of land for sale. There really isn't any extra space to build houses. So I know a government official in Los Angeles offered to create little homes in a parking lot because that was the best he could offer. There was no other options. Some hotels and some rental sites do provide like 15% will go to house the homeless, but those are get filled so fast that it really hasn't even made a major impact on the homeless population there. Many see it as enabling the homeless population. By providing housing, they don't necessarily have to worry about bills like the average person does, and many people feel like that is unfair. The homeless should be admitted into psychiatric hospitals or into addiction treatment programs. This is a very biased one, but honestly, it's really common to hear. Many people just assume that these homeless people are kind of beyond help. Oh, they have a mental health issue. Oh, they're addicted, so they must deserve it. Like they really think they don't see these people. They don't give them the benefit of the doubt, is how I should say it, actually. Next slide, please. Supportive evidence for housing. According to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, providing safe and decent housing for people with mental illness is an effective tool in reducing healthcare costs, including emergency room care, hospitalization, and long-term medical services. one argument you do hear of why we shouldn't provide housing is people, they're like, oh, my taxes are going to housing them. Like, that's not fair. But they don't realize they pay taxes for all this stuff that the homeless are using, anyways. Either way, the taxes are going to be used. They might as well be used more efficiently. The majority of people with serious mental illness can live in independent housing if it is affordable and the necessary and appropriate public health and case management services are available. This is to say that when they're when they're I don't want to say allowed, but when they are able to have a stable house, now they don't have to worry about that, about surviving in that aspect. It really does relieve a lot of pressure, and their primary focus can be on receiving the treatment they need, whether it's through mental health issues or addiction problems. And this is where the social services and treatment programs really come into play. For example, HUD-VASH did a compare and contrast study where they did a treatment first program and a housing first program. In the treatment first program, it was required that the participants, obviously they go to treatment programs for their addiction problems, but they are not given housing. And then housing first, they are immediately placed in permanent housing, and then they can receive case management and social services and treatment programs. At the end of the study, the Housing First program proved to be more effective. More homeless people were able to assimilate back into society. Whereas the treatment program still had good odds, but not as many, because even though they are being treated, at the end of their sessions, they still have to worry about where they're going to sleep tonight or what, like, their next meal. So that really does play a big part in them giving their all into a program when they're still trying to survive out in the real world. The Los Angeles Times stated that Brentwood Community Council is pushing to relocate people from a large encampment on a sidewalk outside the grounds of the Department of Veterans Affairs, calling the camp neither safe nor humane. This goes towards what I was talking about, how shelters and encampments, they're really not safe. Many homeless people don't feel safe there. They're not cleanly, especially at a time where, we randomly got put in a pandemic. Many shelters weren't able to not sustain, but they weren't able to provide the COVID precautions because they don't have the ability, they don't have the pay for it, they don't have the space. So a lot of homeless people were more at risk for getting COVID. Next slide, please. Supportive evidence for no housing. The Los Angeles Times stated that affordable and available government-owned sites in this district are difficult to come by, and private owners of suitable sites are often unwilling to unlease, or to lease. I mixed that up. Unwilling to lease. I talked about this. Los Angeles Times. I mean, Los Angeles. Sorry, Los Angeles is very overcrowded, so it is very hard to come by sites that do have the option and the space to house the homeless. But not only that, the private owned sites, they really don't want to lease when they know that it's going to the homeless. And that's just a bad connotation we have of the homeless. People tend to look down on them like they're lesser and think, oh, they're going to destroy the properties. Like, they just don't trust them. They really think the worst. According to Burien Homeless Think Tank, will some people take advantage of the services provided? Absolutely. Actually, most may take advantage of the services, especially the addicted, alcoholic, and mentally ill. This is a big problem people have with housing them. Like I said, they don't trust them. They really think they're just there to get free meals, stay in a house, maybe destroy the property, and just come and go as they please. They don't believe that they will actually use these programs to benefit them in the long run. People have a preconceived notion that homeless people end up homeless because of mental illness or because all homeless people are drunks or addicts. Many people just think the worst. They think, oh, because you're homeless, you put yourself there. Like, that is completely under your control and you can totally get yourself out of that situation. They don't realize what these people are up against. People that do have mental illness, they can't simply just stop. They can't afford the programs that they need by themselves. So how can they help themselves? How can they get out of that situation? And yeah, there are drunks or addicts and they need treatment too. I think oftentimes we criminalize the drunks and addicts. Like we criminalize addiction when really we should be trying to rehabilitate and recover them. Next slide, please. Evaluation and critique. Many of the housing programs are less effective when treatment services are not required for the participants. Sadly, you do kind of have to force people to get help. If they don't have to, they really won't put in that extra effort. The programs are not designed to withstand long term. I saw this being the reoccurring problem in any promising program. Social services need to be continuously provided. The studies done for these programs were usually only measured over the first year. So there's not enough significant research to evaluate how the program should be changed to be more effective years after. A lot of time you saw within the first year, they had 80 to 90 something percent of people sustaining stable housing. But you come back 14 years later, you can't really say that because they're not being provided with what they were being provided the first year. Like they're kind of forgotten after that. They're on their own. They have to be pushing themselves. Due to the connection to the housing crisis, if houses were priced affordably, less people would be homeless on the verge of homelessness or on the verge of homelessness. We see this a lot, like rents raising, even in a pandemic. Many people lost their jobs. There was no rent relief put out there, at least not widely for sure. Many people lost their jobs and they still were expected to pay all their bills as if nothing had happened. And this is a big issue of why many people are so close to being homeless and have to worry about it. People fail to see the difference between enabling and empowering the homeless. I spoke on this a little bit. People do think, oh, if we just give them housing, they don't have to work as hard. They're just getting handed things. And that's not necessarily true. Like, yeah, some people may take advantage of the system, but what about the ones that don't? You can change people's lives. It is a fine line between enabling and empowering, and it is very hard to see when you're doing one or the other. Obviously, there will have to be rules, regulations, and standards, but some people are so bent on just, oh, it's not fair because I'm not getting handed a silver spoon, that they think others don't deserve the extra help. And we see that a lot with equality. It is a big issue. They think everyone should be given the same amount of help, but it's like not everyone faces the same circumstances. So some people need more help than others. Overall, the housing first method was proven to be the most effective method when it is provided with healthcare and social services. That is my presentation. Thank you so much.